everybody, and welcome to another episode of At the Movies with William Fletcher. As per usual, I am your host, William Fletcher, and this week I am joined by one of my very best friends, Mr. Aaron Laffin.
Hello.
Yes, thank you for joining me for this week's episode. And this week we'll be covering two films: the 2002 film 28 Days Later and its sequel 28 Weeks Later. So you suggested that I do these films, or just 28 Days Later, and I sort of added 28 Weeks Later. So is there any particular reason you suggested I cover 28 Days Later?
Yeah, I recommended it and suggested it because, I thought it was one of the defining movies for the, zombie genre. Like, it's the reason why we get a lot more faster running zombies, more aggressive zombies than the slow walking ones that you saw back in the old days.
Yeah.
So, I thought, I thought it'd be a great introduction to, talking about horror and zombies and stuff like that,
Yeah. And sort of around this, the year of 2002, there was also stuff like Shaun of the Dead, which I'm a really big fan of. There was Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake as well, which came out also around the same time. And this sort of was, an influx of bringing zombies back because, there were tons of zombie films in like the 70s and 80s and late 60s as well. And then they sort of died out for a little bit. And then we sort of had a resurgence in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then we're sort of in a big... you can't move for zombie films and TV shows. They're just everywhere, really. Just tons of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, that's why I thought doing 28 days and, now 28 weeks as well, that's why I thought, because I think it's one of the most influential zombie movies out there.
Yeah.
Again, it's the reason why I say, for instance... with the modern day zombies being runners and all that kind of stuff, for example, what was it? Zombie War. World War Z.
World War Z.
World War Z. Yeah, how fast their zombies are, full sprinters and all that kind of stuff. And their infection happens so quickly.
Yeah. And you find that as well in sort of Korean zombie films, as well as that, zombies in those Korean films, like Train to Busan, are just running everywhere. They're just, they're piling up against windows, all
exactly.
That thing.
And, that's why I think 28 Days is probably one of the best zombie films, because it, pioneered that version of the zombie to come in,
Yeah.
Instead of your slow moving, brains kind of zombie,
Yeah. I'm personally not a fan of zombies that... Well, I guess it sort of depends, on the... I guess it's sort of up to personal preference on what you like zombies to do. If you sort of... because I know there's people that prefer zombies that, run and... fast moving, and others prefer the sort of slow, sort of meandering type of zombies, and I'm much more on that latter end of... I'm not the biggest fan of running zombies. It's not necessarily something that I particularly care for.
Yeah,
it's not something that just sort of appeals to sort of the idea, I guess, of what I have as zombies in my head, I guess. But I guess we'll get a bit more into that later on in this discussion.
Cool.
28 Days Later, directed by Danny Boyle, who's a very well-respected and regarded director. Yeah, so I guess, do you just want to, jump into the film, or is there, a specific place you want to start with this discussion?
No, I say let's just jump in and go from the start,
Yeah, so we open on essentially the beginning of the virus happening. There's some... monkeys, or apes, essentially being... we've got
they're infected, with the disease that the scientist says.
Yeah,
and they're studying it.
This disease. Yeah, and then there's people who are breaking in and kind of everything kind of goes wrong from there. And I think this opening scene is a perfect way of establishing the the story, sort of setting up everything in the first few minutes, being like, okay, the zombies, this is how the zombies were created, and this is how they are, and that's all you really need to know, and there's not much else that is needed for it. I like, because it's not very long. It's not a particularly long scene. It's like less than 10 minutes or so.
And like, I gotta say, this sets up the zombies as not like undead per se. They're more just infected individuals.
Yeah, exactly.
Infected with like a rabies type virus.
Yeah, it's not like zombies in a traditional sense of just people who were once dead who are now living. Like, it's not like a traditional. Yeah, the sort of. If I described zombies to sort of just like a layman who wasn't particularly familiar with them, they wouldn't necessarily picture 28 Days Later style zombies. They'd picture something from like Shaun of the Dead or Night of the Living Dead or something like that.
And I guess that's what I like about this movie is that they're not your standard zombies. They're not like the undead. Like, they're more animalistic. People who have been infected with something and has gone into baser instincts.
Yeah, and we sort of learn that throughout the course of the film as well.
Yeah,
is that
and even
it yeah, it's not like sort of the whole like, it's not like I don't know how to phrase it exactly. It's not like it's just like they sort of just lose. They're just like people just very stripped down.
Yeah, it's not like your standard thing. Like you can tell with the monkeys, the monkeys, jumping around, banging against the glasses and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and like the name of the virus itself is called Rage. So
yeah, I mean that is pretty pretty much sums up what it means. And yeah, so these chimpanzees, they are let free and they attack the scientists and all these people. And I don't know if it was because what I was watching it on, but the whole film had a real sort of like, I don't know what like the word, like a filter type thing on it. Like, it had a very distinctive like look, I guess is the sort of way to put it. Like, it looked very like at the very end of the film, it sort of becomes sort of like regular, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, I thought that was an interesting touch, but I guess sort of gives it a distinctive look.
Kind of had like it had a little bit of grain to it. I found.
Yeah, that's that kind of thing. Yeah.
I guess like that gives it a lot more. I'm not sure if that was on purpose or like on the older stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's like a early 2000s film, so but
yeah, so I just thought that was an interesting touch, if that was intentional, and I think it probably was intentional. It just sort of threw me off for a little bit.
Yeah, but I think it's a good touch because I think it makes it more. A lot of films of that era had the similar kind of graininess to it, but for this, I think it helped with making the mood a lot more. Like the setting, the colors, and all that made it a lot more dim and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it definitely added. It was a very good atmospheric choice that sort of helped to enhance certain scenes throughout the course of the film and made them, more impactful, or gave you a greater reaction to them because of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so and then we sort of, with these chimps escaping, we sort of are given the pieces in our head to be like figure out what's going to happen next. And then we meet our main character, Jim, in hospital.
Oh, like waking up like Rick Grimes style as Walking Dead,
Yeah, exactly. From a coma, I'm pretty sure it is. And
coma from a car crash. Oh, car accident.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of a trope, or in sort of, not necessarily the specific thing, but just like a thing in zombie films where characters sort of been away from sort of society as a whole, so when they come back, everything's changed, and zombies are a problem now.
Exactly.
yeah, so he wakes up and it's very like one of a very iconic shot of him on the bridge with Big Ben Tower in the background, like that
And
right there just is
London
a shot.
style.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like that shot right there is just a iconic shot of the
Which
film.
I gotta say, that's probably one of my favorite things about the film is that it's not set in America.
Mm.
Like a lot of zombie movies and all that are always set in America,
Yeah, a lot
or
of
like
them are.
yeah. And so I like the change that it's actually set in London,
Yeah,
in England, which is like you don't get a lot of films like that. Like, of course, you got like Shaun of the Dead, which
yeah.
is, but like
But that's much
that's
more in like a town, like a sort of suburban area.
yeah.
Well, it's not like the sort of big, you know, city of London.
And and like that's what I think also gives it the charm of the movie that
Yeah,
it's like, for instance, they like London, if you look at real life, like they probably wouldn't be as prepared as a zombie apocalypse to say America because their gun laws are pretty like no one has guns there,
yeah. Pretty
starters.
stringent laws
So
in yeah.
which like I
Mm,
think like really helps
yeah,
the story just being set in there in general.
yeah, because it sort of gives you more like there's more suspense that's created from it because you're not entirely sure because they don't just have they can't just walk into there's not like a gun store down the road that they can go to get stuff to protect themselves. They have to sort of make do with what they can find.
Yeah,
Mm. And I do like how
which is like another problem I find with zombie movies
mm,
is that a lot of the survivors can just like all the ones set in America, they can just walk down to a gun shop and get a bunch of guns, and it's like, oh sweet, now
yeah,
the zombies are easy.
yeah. I do think that can be that sort of removes tension if you sort of have the idea like, oh, there's just a gun store nearby. But to be fair, you could get like in some films you can get really good sort of suspense out of that. Like, okay, they've got to get to this gun store to get weapons, but there's like a whole the streets filled with zombies, so they have to find a way to get past that, and you can create compelling
Yeah.
drama out of that. But yeah, it
Uh,
definitely can sort of lessen the get lessen the emotional weight or tension I guess the film can have if you know that nearby there's a place where they can get stuff to protect themselves.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I do something that I really love about just the beginning of this film is that we're just with like this one guy sort of discovering everything with him. We are not sort of like it's not we don't see anything like beyond the chimpanzee attack at the very beginning. We spend most of like the first the beginning with this guy seeing what he's seeing and learning about the things as he's learning about them as well, which I think is a very good way to sort of catch up audience members that maybe aren't entirely aware of what's going on, or helping them sort of catching the audience up just in case they are a bit confused, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, and like I think it also shows like how lonely it is because London's a busy place, and to see it completely and utterly like desolate, like no one's there, it's like it really brings the isolation and how nobody's like alive pretty much. Like there's so many, everything's gone. It's makes it so it's like really puts that isolation.
Yeah.
In.
And I think that's a very easy way of introducing sort of tension, like so like it's just this one guy by himself, but there's like a very a chance something bad could happen because he doesn't know what's going on and there's no other people, and just hearing him sort of yelling out for people and no one responding because they're all gone or they're dead or whatever's sort of I get that's sort of something like a fear of mine of like suddenly just like sort of waking up and like there's nobody there and there's just nobody around. Like I just feel like that's like
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that most people have though. Like
yeah, you see that in a dream sequence, a little bit like almost halfway through the film or something like that.
Yeah.
Where he's having a dream where he wakes up and no one's there, and he for one breaks down, falls on his knees and crying, and then he wakes up and everyone's still there.
Yeah, exactly. This film definitely sort of looks at the whole sort of thing of loneliness because in this sort of situation there's only so many people alive that you can surround yourself with and consider yourself safe with, and even then that's unlikely, as we find out towards the end of the film. It's the sort of the isolation of it is very scary.
It's got like that really
and so I think it's at this point where he first meets. He goes into like I think it's like an opera house or something, or he goes into.
It was a cathedral.
Oh, it's a cathedral.
Church.
Yeah, a church. Yeah, he goes into a church, and that's when he first runs into zombies.
Infected. Yeah. And like the way they did it, I think is really cool. Like how there's like pretty much like a bunch of bodies, and like you don't know what happened. You could be like they all got the military. You could be like the military came and maybe shot them down. They could have done like a mass suicide. They could have just all died due to infection. Who knows?
Yeah.
But like, I love how the first infected you see are like hiding within the corpses, and then like as soon as he says like hello, like you see two of them pop up.
Yeah.
From the pile of bodies.
Yeah, and I think it's very early. This film is very good at sort of introducing like sort of tension with zombies and making them seem like a threat. Because while I'm not a fan of that style of zombie, I will admit, if I was in that situation, I'd be shitting myself, because it is a terrifying situation to find yourself in with people wanting to eat you, running at you.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I love how a lot of time you only hear that the zombies only like scream. Mm-hmm. They scream. They don't like, because like if you think about it, if we didn't have any like the intelligence to talk, that's probably one of the only noises you could make.
Yeah.
And like they're not dead. They're still alive. They're just in an awkward state of mind.
Yeah.
So like, it's the only way they can like verbalize, because like they still like feel pain and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like they still starve. Like they talk about that in the movie later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where you sort of delve into the sort of idea of like they're not, proper zombies. They're still like sort of like in limbo, I guess. Like they're still people, but just sort of basic urges and sort of basic instincts as well. But more on an evil side, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so he is attacked, or well, the infected attempt to attack him, and he's manages to escape and is saved by two new characters, Selena and Mark.
Yeah,
were able to very quickly rescue him and keep him safe, which again is like another sort of trope of zombie just media. Character who's not used to this is saved by people who have been doing this for a longer period of time. At this point it's been 28 days, so they've been doing it for a few weeks at that point, but they know more about what's going on than Jim does.
Yeah, exactly.
No, sorry.
No, you continue. Sorry.
I was just gonna say that I think Well, uh, spoilers. I sort of say this every time, but we delve into spoilers heavily. I thought that Mark and Selena would be like big parts of the film and would be in it throughout the entire thing or most of it, and then Mark dies pretty much as soon as we meet him, which was a real shock.
Yeah, exactly. And like, as though I would have liked, Mark's character to be a lot more like explored, because the like first proper interaction other than running that you get in between Jim and Mark is Mark tells a joke.
Yeah.
He tells he does the giraffe and a man walk into a bar, and giraffe passes out and the guy goes to leave, and the bartender goes, "Oh, you can't leave him lying there," and he's like, "Oh, he's not lying, he's a giraffe,"
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And then like I really like that interaction, because it's like, not everything is like so serious and all that. And
yeah, exactly. It's
like,
not so dour and depressing.
Mark has a darker backstory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, we sort of have this thing of sort of, meeting them, and they're sort of talking about, the sort of stuff they've had to deal with already at this point, this 28 days in, and, what they've had to do sort of to get to the point they are at already. And it's pretty, gruesome, what they've had to do to survive, but that's sort of the choices you make when you get into, this sort of position, into a zombie apocalypse. You sort of have to make the tough calls sometimes, is, I guess you could say.
Yeah, exactly. Like, zombie apocalypse is like, if you want to survive, you're gonna have to do like everything you can.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to, get to a point where you are gonna have to kill some people, but you don't have to be happy about it, but it's just sort of a decision you have to make to sort of survive.
Yeah, exactly.
Meet, and they sort of are they head off to this. Jim wants to leave. Actually, Jim wants to find his family. Actually, to see if they're alive.
His family.
They're dead.
Yeah, which it's a pretty jarring scene, especially if anyone's had to deal with anything like suicide or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but it is quite an emotional scene though. Like,
yeah,
and it's shocking, but it brings like reality to this world.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
how many people are gonna be like, "Well, zombie apocalypse. I don't want to live through that."
Yeah. I figured they would go to his parents' house and they would be there and they'd probably be dead. I figured actually they would be infected, but I was not expecting them to have, committed suicide. I thought, he'd have to kill them or something, but I thought that was a much more a subversive take on it, and I actually preferred that, because you don't see that as much.
And like the subtle details, like, like she's his mother is holding his photo, and you see Jim pick it up and read it, and it says like, "Oh, if you've had to like, if you read it, it says like, oh, Jim, we're leaving this world, and I hope you don't wake up from the coma, and you're with us when we leave," and stuff like that. And it's like, oh,
yeah, that's a very hard sort of pill to swallow. They just sort of like, man, my parent, sort of this like, you weren't, he wasn't there for his parents, final moments, as it were. And they figured they would be joining him, or well, he'd join them, relatively soon, and that evidently is not the case, which is it really goes for the emotional moments really early on.
Yeah. And like how like Mark and Selena's character says, like how they both like agree, like you're lucky that they went out that way.
Yeah, and that really...
that like, really sets the tone, like, oh, you're lucky that they went out by suicide
Yeah.
than like getting devoured.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it sort of portrays like, oh, it's a lot worse to just die in some other means than becoming a zombie, to become infected and live the way that they do, and that really sells like, man, it must be torture for for people to become the infected, and we discover more about that later on.
And like we ended up at that point getting like a bit of Mark's backstory about like how his whole family got, like, for instance, like he says he lost, like, everyone was running,
Yeah.
and he lost grip of his sister, and
Yeah.
he doesn't say it directly, but we presume that his sister ended up getting trampled, which I'm like, that's nasty.
Yeah, that's
Like,
also
and
bad as well.
yeah, and then like and then like he says, oh, I climbed bodies and then got on top of this little thing, and I see my father, but it's not my father. I don't even recognize his face.
Yeah.
Which also we presume that his father got infected, and he says like you can't tell the difference between infected and non-infected.
Yeah. It's it really sells the whole sort of, you sort of have to, even if you don't necessarily want to, you kind of have to disassociate, your family as you once knew them with them, once they become infected, because they're completely different, and you probably won't even know that they are your family.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they later that night are attacked by multiple infected, and Mark gets bitten, which was
Yeah, that a
unexpected.
bit of a shock. And then like see Selena, like he goes like it's not a bite or something like that, and you just see Selena just go at him with the machete.
Yeah, and just
And like
kills
like
him.
when I first saw the movie, I thought Selena was just going to chop off his arm,
Yeah, I
but no,
thought that's where it was
she
going
just
to. I was like, okay, she's gonna try and, because that's again, this is another sort of common trope in zombie media is, someone gets bitten and they get, an arm cut off or a leg cut off or something to try and stop the infection, and that just makes things worse. Though usually it either they die of, later blood loss,
blood
or
loss.
they don't, or occasionally the infection, it doesn't matter, the infection, has gotten far enough anyway, but it's more, yeah, the loss of blood.
Yeah, and then like we learn at this point, like Selena says, you have like 10 to 20
Yeah,
seconds
second.
before they turn,
Yeah, and I
and
like
it's like,
that they establish the rule, and like, yeah, it's not like, because it's always very much a case of like, it's sort of inconsistent how long it takes for people to become zombies or infected. In other, like in films, it takes hours. Some, it happens more or
instantly,
less
pretty much.
instantaneously. Some it takes days. Like it's sort of like
Like,
depends.
yeah, like War was Eve, for again using that as an example. Like the fastest you see is 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And then like say for instance, again using like Walking Dead,
Mm-hmm.
or it's like maybe it depends. Like sometimes it's like a day or two, and sometimes it's like a couple of hours.
Yeah. It but I like that this film establishes like, no, as soon as someone's bitten, you can't do anything besides just kill them before they turn. Like that's the only thing you can do. Because if you don't,
Yeah,
they're gonna turn, and I do like that. And I do think it's kind of a bit brutal how she doesn't even hesitate for a second. She immediately is just like, as soon as she like clocks that he's been bitten, just immediately kills him. Like
yeah,
doesn't
and
even.
you see Mark put
Mm,
up his hand.
yeah, and
It's
like
like
try
no, no, no,
pleading.
wait,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
wait, and then Yeah, and like he didn't even get like a chance to or anything like that. He's dead.
He didn't get a chance to say any final words. Just immediately killed. And I think that it's a real brutality to it. But I feel that very much
that's the tone of the film.
Sets it like very like in the first half an hour or so of this film, it very easily sets everything up well, and it sets the tone as like and establishes the rules as well. Like this is how they work. If you get bitten, you gotta do it now, and then or they're gonna turn, and you can't risk that happening. So. To sort of continue on that point on people becoming infected, I do kind of like. This is skipping forward quite a bit, and then we'll sort of circle back to this. One of the characters who gets infected at one point, I do kind of like how they don't try and hide it. They kind of sort of So actually, I guess it's sort of connected to this. So we meet. So Selena and Jim.
And then like. You can.
They sort of meet. They meet
find
a house and an apartment. Well, it's more of an apartment building that they have to get to. And they have to run up the stairs, and they're getting chased by infected, and they've got a man at the top who's sort of got a SWAT shield. Right shield, yeah.
Shield.
And he's holding
back. And that's like a really cool introduction for Frank, which is like, and you think he's gonna be like this badass, I murder these zombies, like I absolutely destroy them, but you find out he's just a dad protecting his daughter.
Yeah, he's just doing what he can to look after himself and his daughter, but he's not a violent he doesn't have sort of take pleasure in doing it, or he doesn't take he's not just like this absolute machine who can just mow down just rows of zombies. He just sort of knows how to protect himself against them.
I really like Frank as a character.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's pretty much the central dad of the group. He's the one that looks after everything and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, I'd probably say he's my favorite character of the film, probably. Although I do really like Jim. I think Jim's a really good character as well.
Yeah, exactly. But I would agree that Frank is probably my favorite character overall. Jim being the main character, of course, it's and they really make it so he's very likable.
Yeah.
But Frank is a fun, nice character,
Yeah. No, I get what. Yeah, no. But I do think Frank is really good. And I think Brendan Gleeson, just as an actor and other stuff I've seen him in, is also really good. So that's...
Yeah, he's a really good actor.
Yeah, in the stuff like in Bruges, which I've covered on the show a couple months ago, I thought he was really good in that. And I think he's really good in this as well. And he's a real, nice presence to have, because he sort of adds something, to every part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so then we also meet him and his daughter, who have basically holed out in this sort of apartment, to survive
exactly.
While they, although they are, as we learned very quickly, are running low on supplies.
Yeah, exactly. They're not going out. It hasn't rained for 10 days, as we heard.
Yeah.
We find out. So they haven't been able to collect any water. Nor has the good old trick of using condensation to collect water. That hasn't really worked. So it's we're out of options.
Yeah.
We need you as much as you need us.
Yeah, and so they plan to leave the apartment. Well, first of all, they get a sort of military sort of call, sort of broadcast signal.
Yeah.
That there is, military. There's a blockade that they can head to, And so they decide to sort of make a go for it. And, you know, that's sort of something that comes up a lot in other sort of similar films of like, okay, so they're sort of trapped here, but they then find out, oh, there's this military location they can get to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and there's a scene just sort of before they head off to make their journey where they're in like a supermarket, just, you know, gathering supplies, but they're sort of making sure to choose.
A little bit of fun.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. That's sort of, when I was younger, that was something that I always wanted to do. I just wanted to go into like a supermarket and just grab, you know, just like get trolleys of like everything I wanted, you know, just like boxes of chocolates and, you know, all these all these drinks and, you know, all these, you know, donuts and all these sorts of things. And they sort of, they do make it clear to make sure they get stuff that's like, stuff that they don't have to necessarily keep, like
yeah, stuff they don't need that they want.
Yeah, like sort of stuff that will last them a while, so they don't have to, you know, get through it, you know, quickly. Like, you know, the sort of
like and like in the supermarket you also see like a lot of the fresh produce has gone rotten.
Yeah, because, you know, nobody's been buying it, and it's all gone bad because it's been, you know, a month and nobody's bought it, and that happens.
And like you see, Serena says like, "Oh, don't buy anything that needs to be cooked," which shows that they're not really wanting anything that, you know, will take time to cook and all that. They want like a quick meal that they can just eat on the go or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can't. This is a situation where you can't really risk to cook food, because that could also attract attention to, you know, making a fire or something. You know, it's something that could go very wrong if you attempt to.
Yeah.
So yeah, they, you know, get their. Yeah. They get all the stuff they need, or want rather, than they, you know, continue sort of on their way. Yeah, and they just pack up like multiple trolleys worth of just various chocolates and other sort of very easy to prepare foods. And so they're one of my favorite scenes of the film actually is when they're in like the tunnel and the car like is like jammed. No, it's like it hasn't run out of petrol because they get the car moving, but it's like stopped for some reason.
And they travel in black taxis.
Yeah, and so they get into this they get into the car, but they're in this tunnel and it's like stopped working, so their tires gone. Actually, that's what it was. They've got the tires gone, so they have to, you know, quickly change the tire while the infected are running towards them. And I think it's a very intense, well done scene.
Yeah, especially as you see the rats first.
Yeah,
like the rats are running away from the infected, and that gives them like a bit of a hint, like, oh, there's infected on the way.
Yeah, so that information is relayed to the audience as well, that they have to be like, oh no, so they're coming. Yeah, something bad is, you know, approaching. They need to, you know, hurry up. And, you know, you sort of see it in like, I mean, you don't see them clearly, but you don't need to, because you know it's infected. You know, you see like shadows of them as they like run past, you know, jumping over cars and all these things, and you're just like, get the tire back on. It's gonna, you know.
And they get really close.
Yeah,
they get super close to touch the car and stuff like that.
Yeah, they like start. Yeah, they like get on the car, and it's like, and I was, for a second, I actually sort of got lost in the moment and was like, oh, were they? I was like, because I always appreciate when a film can sort of make me forget, like, okay, it's a film and think like this is actually happening, or like, oh, it's too early for them to die. I'm just like, just hurry up, you know, get the tire back on, get in, you know, it's that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you know that like if they can't get the tire on, they are stuck. Like they cannot go anywhere, and they're going to die. because if the car can't move and it's surrounded by infected who will probably get in because there's so many of them.
And we've seen like that they easily like break through windows and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, it's just
nerve-wracking.
It's very nerve-wracking, and that's just sort of a sign of good screenwriting and sort of good filmmaking as well. Actually, that something that seems so like, you've kind of seen something like this before, but it still gets you nervous and tense, like, something that could really happen, even though you probably in the back of your head are like, I don't think it will happen necessarily, because it doesn't seem right, but it could, and I think that is like showing like that's good filmmaking, that you can be, so
create so much suspense and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Get caught up in the emotion of it. Yeah, but they're very luckily they're able to escape and survive.
Yeah, and they have like a bit of a camping scene where they rest. And
that's where Jim has his dream. This is where Jim has his dream, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's exactly where Jim has his dream.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think, and sorry, and I think that. Thank you. That this film does a good job. That other sort of zombie films and just sort of films about apocalypses and that sort of stuff can kind of fail to do it, and they don't really show the relationships between the characters and sort of how they feel about each other and how they play off each other. More often than not, it's like, look, here's the cool action, or here's like, cool, special effects or anything, and sometimes you sort of lose the character element.
Yeah, and like they don't build on the characters. Like they're like, oh yeah, this character's this character, and this character has this personality, but they don't really mix the personalities that often, or like they do stereotypes.
Yeah, but this one to me felt like they sort of perfectly got sort of the balance of the two, like showing off the sort of spectacle and the whole, the effects and the whole negativity of the situation, and how well it was, and cinematically, but and sort of how it's shot and how they show off everything, but it was able to sort of balance the relationships between characters and sort of getting good chemistry off each other as well, which I feel like is important, especially in this kind of film when some of the characters are going to die. Some characters are going to die. You need to have chemistry, and you need to show that how these characters feel about each other,
and make the viewers care about those characters. Like make them.
Yeah, like you don't
like and like the thing. Sorry, continue. Sorry.
No, and because it shows you how, because there, and it's a good way to sort of set up for later on when bad things happen, when people die or they get hurt, as we will find out very shortly, how these characters play off each other, and sort of how they how they treat the girl, the little girl, how they're sort of they all very parent, they act like her parents essentially, and they look after her because she's comparatively much younger to them.
And that's like when we found out like Selena has like, they asked like, oh, how does Selena get to sleep so easily, and we find out like
she's taking these sort of sleeping pills, and that's what helps, but it's what they want.
And that whole premise of her having pills comes in like a little bit like in the final act of the film.
And then it's around this time when they sort of have breakfast, and they're sort of figuring out what they're gonna do, that Frank gets and like the movie shows how it's not just getting bitten, but like any type of bodily fluid, like a drop of blood, which is how Frank gets infected, is that a drop of blood falls in his eye. And I thought that was I kind of, in sort of concept, I kind of felt like I would have felt like had it been done slightly differently, I felt like that would have been cheap. Like, because how it happens is he's just like kicking like a wall with like dead infected on it, and that's how he gets blood in his eyes. But that could have felt really cheap and just like, oh, that's just how you're gonna get to it. But it actually kind of worked for me, and I was kind of like, oh, it actually,
because it's
Jesus,
something. Yeah, it's something you're not expecting, and it's like, and it was like, he lost his shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he was mad because it wasn't what he thought it was. Like the blockade.
Yeah, exactly. They sort of get and there's actually a little scene just before this actually where we see Jim killing one of the infected, where they're sort of exploring. I think it's sort of around the same time they're sort of exploring around, and Jim gets confronted with an infected that he has
and he goes to and it's in a petrol station.
And
the infected he kills is a child, which also is a thing that you don't see a lot in zombie movies or TV shows.
Yeah, it was a very powerful scene, just sort of how he sort of accepted. I did think, I thought it worked. It did feel like a bit like Matt. I guess it sort of depends, of course, how long of like time has passed in the movie. It's, I presume, only a couple of days at this point. At the sort of thinking about it first, it's like, I'm not sure if I would. I mean, of course, it sort of depends, of course, like, if I would be in that position, of course, and I get that it's not real, but it's like, I feel like, I don't know, if I sort of, like...
could kill a child.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if I sort of bought, like, I don't remember, did he have, I'm trying to remember if there was a bit in the scene where he's, like, sort of a bit contemplative about it at first, or if he's thinking like, oh, should I do this or not, or if he's sort of like
he was thinking about it, like he pinned the child infected down with his foot.
I do think at least they go to like an effort to be like, okay, so it's
hesitated for a bit, and like it's a hard choice, and like you don't actually see him kill the infected. You hear a noise of the bat hitting something.
Yeah, but you don't see anything. But I don't think you need to see it.
But you don't hear it. You don't need to see it. And like in the same scene, if you have keen eyes, you can also notice that they actually had something even worse than that, and that's a dead baby.
Is there like something in like the
I'm not sure if it was a doll. I'm not sure if it was a doll or an actual baby or whatever. But virtually, you see like a person lying there, and what we can presume is a dead child.
Jeez, that's.
And it really sets the scene how this movie isn't holding back. Like, this is nasty. It's nasty.
Yeah, because like in something like Shaun of the Dead, it really doesn't go for like sort of that kind of zombie stuff. Like it doesn't, like the youngest, like you see like one child who is a zombie, but you don't really see many like children getting attacked by zombies from my memory of it. It's more often adults.
And like going to say, for instance, Walking Dead, you only ever see like pretty much one child, like two or three children who are infected. Like, and that's like it. Like in the first episode, you see like a little kid, and then in like the next season, you see Sophia.
It's not something that like you sort of.
It's been so long. So long in this particular franchise.
It's not a. I guess it's sort of. I guess if you watch like a lot more zombie films in TV, you might be more used to that. But if this is sort of like one of your starting off points, you probably wouldn't expect to see like, or have it sort of implied that our main character just murdered a child, an infected child. He was gonna kill him, but still a child being killed. It's.
you see his inner turmoil as well for doing that afterwards.
Yeah, he
and
doesn't
a little bit later on.
Yeah, I do. It is kind of like, yeah, he doesn't necessarily, he's not like, sort of reverse to like he doesn't sort of act like nothing's happened, and he doesn't sort of become the like sort of the 180 of like he's sort of unemotional now, and sort of he does, he sort of has that turmoil, that sort of emotion of like, I had to do it, but
I was gonna die.
But I also just don't, I don't feel good about doing it, but I had to for my own reasons, survival. And so sort of going back to Frank, who gets infected.
You can bring that up to Frank. Like you can like, I'm fairly sure if you actually count, it does like do like 10 seconds. It does actually.
Yeah, I haven't I didn't like count it when I was watching it.
10 seconds for him to actually be infected.
Yeah, but I do think it, because it seems like the film would be like Danny Boyle, the director, would be one of those who, if he says something that's like 2 minutes, it would take like 2 minutes of screen time would happen, or and I feel like this is something where like you could be like, you do it like it would be 10 seconds from when the blood makes contact with his eye to him becoming one of the infected, and that's just really a great visual of just seeing like the blood like falling down and as like from above.
You get like a first person view as like as the blood droplet going into his eye, and then like you see his like, first he's like oh, and then all of a sudden the panic sets in, like oh no, and Hannah comes up and starts going like, what's wrong? And he's like, it's fine, just get away from me, just get away. Yeah.
And I do like that, how he's not just like, he doesn't try and be like, oh no, it's nothing to worry about. He immediately, well, because in this case, you can't really do that, like, because you're like, you're about to turn infected. He's like, no, get away from me, and that's sort of one of
and he even like pushes her away.
Yeah, that's one of my big sort of pet peeve. Sort of, I get sort of that like it needs to sort of be done to create story and to create tension, but I do find it kind of annoying in zombie films, and when people are like, oh, they've been bitten, they're like, oh, everything's fine, nothing's wrong, and it's like, well, it's clearly not because you've been bitten. But this, they're like, no, something is wrong, you should get away, and I do think that's a good way of dealing with it.
Like you see that in like, say for instance, Shaun of the Dead. When Sean's mother is bitten, but you don't find out until like later on.
Yeah,
and it's like, that comes as a surprise, and it's a bit of tension. Yeah. But it's like, why didn't you tell people? It's like,
Although they do try and explain it in the film from my memory, but it is a bit like, I don't know if I necessarily care for that, but so Frank is killed by the military, who come in and rescue
which
the character.
Really brings in the he was so close, like they were going to find the military.
Yeah, exactly.
He was so close to surviving that, and it's like,
if he had just if he had waited a few more minutes, if he'd been just a little bit more patient, this would all be fine. The military would have picked them up, and he wouldn't have died. But it didn't happen. As
it really brings in like it's like one decision, one split second, and something you get like something can happen in like that split second, that one rash decision.
Yeah, and it's just and it's unfortunate too for
that one run,
and it's just unfortunate for them to lose, and it's unfortunate for the audience to lose. Because he's he's a great character, and it kind of sucks to lose someone that the audience at this point presumably
has grown
to like and really enjoy seeing.
And you see like the characters struggle to kill him. Like Jim hesitates, like he really has that, and he was about to do it before the military but you see him really hesitate, and like you see Hannah's turmoil, that like just emotional turmoil.
I do kind of like how they sort of be like, okay, so even though they've sort of been stripped back to basic instincts, the infected can occasionally kind of have like all moments of like, they sort of have bits where they sort of revert to their like sort of natural sort of human state.
Yeah.
Like, have you seen Day of the Dead from 1985?
Yes, I've seen that one. Yeah.
I do the zombie Bub. For those who haven't seen it, he's a zombie in that film who essentially has been trained by a scientist to sort of become more human. Essentially, is sort of the best way to put it. He's he's sort of got back sort of more humanistic, more like human instincts, and he's being more human, but he's still a zombie, but he's got more human elements to him.
And yeah, exactly. And you see like the same thing in Shaun of the Dead, where they still retain some of the human qualities, human memories.
Yeah.
Say for instance, Nick Frost's character, what is Ed? Yeah, Ed. You see Shaun and Ed, a zombie Ed, playing video games in the shed at the end of the movie.
Yeah, and they're still and so they're still sort of showing like, and there's sort of a whole sort of and that's sort of something I guess in stuff like Dawn of the Dead as well, sort of the idea of like, even when people are zombies, they still like go into the mall, and sort of giving into sort of like commercialism is sort of like a big sort of metaphor for why that film is set in a mall. Is sort of people are acting like zombies and going into this sort of world that doesn't necessarily, they don't necessarily need to do, but they just sort of have been like this, and this is sort of what they know, so they continue to do it, even if it's not what they should be or necessarily need to be doing with themselves.
Leading into that, leading to like people itself, the military, the whole military scene in 28 Days Later.
Yeah.
Just how that whole series of events and with the military shows how the biggest enemy isn't the infected, it's other people.
Yeah, that's a big sort of thing that sort of goes through all zombie films and stuff, is that infected really aren't the biggest problem, and it's always people. In games like The Last of Us, you have the the zombies, but you also have to deal with the other people as well. You have to deal with who are at times just as bad, if not worse. In fact, you could argue they are worse because they know they are doing bad things, while zombies don't really know that they are. They're just sort of doing, their instinctual things. So it's not, they're villainous enemies, but it's not because of any real choices they're making. Well, just they are making, but it's just instincts, while the people are like evil people. So this whole sort of third act with the whole military thing, I think it's probably my least favorite sort of bit of the film. I was sort of less interested in what they did when they got met up with the military. Just sort of personally, I didn't care for it as much. I guess sort of we can sort of talk about all this stuff sort of as one. I felt it was really. I liked the scene where Christopher Eccleston, who was the sort of army general, introduces them to one of his like sort of soldiers who's become one of the infected. But they've sort of just been leaving him without food and sort of starving him to sort of see what happens,
how long it takes.
Which shows a real like sort of sadism from these people. Like, they're sort of torturing these the infected, not for any real purpose necessarily to fix anything, but more just to see how long it to sort of
to see what happens.
To see what happens, yeah. And they don't want to fix these people. They just want to, sort of have games and have fun, I guess. And that's sort of,
Yeah, and like that, like it does really show how. I'm a bit upset though. It's like only one soldier stood up and was like, "Hey, what we're doing isn't right."
Yeah, I do think that's a bit interesting. That like, yeah, only one guy's like, "You sure about this?" It's like I feel like it's probably. I mean, I kind of would have liked it more if it was sort of more obvious that maybe there were more guys that agreed with him, but they didn't want to risk saying anything for any, just in for any sort of repercussions for what
and like the whole scene's leading up.
There's no real authority other than
exactly
them, which is the military, and they thought, well, there's no rules, so and it's pretty like the whole scene is pretty nasty. Like when they're forcing them to get into dresses and all that, it's like
that felt a bit weird where they're trying to like force Selena and Hannah to like, have sex with
especially
them. Like, oh, that's a bit, gross.
Well, they didn't go, I wouldn't say, but they were like building up to like that's what.
Yeah, it's not like they actually committed the act per se.
Gonna do,
but
like they were forcing them into. They get damn close.
Yeah, they were. It was very much sort of building like, oh, this is probably where this is going, but it doesn't go that far because, well, Jim attempts to stop this and he's thrown out. Well, yeah, he's thrown out, but he manages to, and they attempt to kill him, but he gets his way back. And I really, to be fair, after they sort of stopped trying to go for that whole sort of uncomfortable stuff, and it's just Jim sort of going around the compound, and there's infected getting in, and there's a really great bit where there's like lightning flashing at a window, and an infected like bursts through a window and like gets a guy like that. Like it's really
it was stuff. Actually the soldier that was infected.
That soldier breaks free
due to Jim shooting his chain.
Yeah, he is let free, and then he sort of gets his revenge, as it were, on these guys who've been essentially torturing him because they haven't been giving him food, and he hasn't been able to sort of live his life properly. And I think
and I gotta say though, it's like very like ex machina. Like all of a sudden, like Jim can like knows how to shoot a gun.
Yeah,
and
it is very weird that he does. I think I was sort of wrapped up in this sort of like, oh, it's cool, he's sort of getting revenge on these people. That, like you mentioned, it is interesting how he suddenly can just do all these things, but we don't really get any evidence prior, like earlier, that like, oh, he's got he's been shooting guns or anything like that.
Yeah, and like I guess like you kind of have to have a way like he comes and saves the day and all that.
Yeah. But I do think it's a very sort of.
Oh no! Don't worry.
It's don't worry. This happens all the time. It's a very cathartic ending, and you sort of get the ending you want, and the
happy ending.
Happy ending. The army general gets eaten, and there's some really great shots of like Jim standing in like the rain, and there's like lightning in the background, and there's infected and everything, and
like the whole scene is pretty cool. Like I love the scene itself.
Yeah,
and like Jim doesn't get off scot-free. He does get
hurt. Like I do like how they are like, oh yeah, no, he's getting hurt. Like he, by the end he's like bloodied and he's bruised and he's got cuts and everything.
And like. It really Selena thinks he's infected.
Yeah, but he's at first, but he, as we find out, he's not, and it's very much, he's just went through hell to go back to save them.
Yeah,
and
then he ends up getting shots, and like you get quick.
When he got shot, I was
a hospital or something like that.
Yeah, he gets to like a hospital and he gets. I thought honestly when he got shot, like, oh, is he actually gonna die? Because I didn't think he was in the sequel, And so, yeah, he gets shot. Thankfully, he survives. And we sort of cut to a little bit later on. Some more time has passed.
And they're a little bit, like, isolated in a hut, and they, like, put a bunch of cloth together to say hello, have a massive sign saying hello as a jet flies by.
Yeah, and that's pretty much where the film ends. Essentially, it's sort of a very sort of hopeful ending. And
talking about the ending, there is an actual alternative ending. And like I actually have the DVD set.
Oh, okay. What's just out of curiosity, what's the alternate ending?
So Jim actually dies. Jim dies. Like they couldn't save him after that. Like they try to, but they don't see. Which I think that's the more realistic ending.
Yeah, considering that it's it's a bullet, and you probably don't have as much access to proper
and you're in the
supplies. Yeah, he dies.
And like he ends up dying, and like I can't remember the whole sequence, but I think it ends around about the same way. Just it's only Selena and Hannah in the hut together instead of Jim, Selena, and Hannah.
Yeah,
and they're like a lot more like a lot more sadder.
It's a lot more subdued. It's not like it's not like these sort of two people having fun. It's just reserved.
Like, yeah,
sort of processing what they've had to deal with at this point.
When the ending that we actually got is like, Jim makes the joke like, "Oh, I think you actually looked good in that dress."
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Which I'm not really sure like what ending I would have preferred.
I feel
because both really good ending.
Yeah, I feel like I would need to sort of see that sort of alternate ending sort of in practice, like watch the full movie and then that scene sort of instead of the ending scene it's in in the proper like the sort of theatrical version of it. I sort of have to watch both of them back to back. But I think they both could work. It just sort of depends on I guess if
what
the film stays the same. I mean, I feel like there'd be more emotional impact to having Jim die, having the main character die, and sort of having these characters, the two female characters, having to sort of deal with that, even if it's only for a brief amount of time. I think that would definitely be interesting.
Like having the main character die can work. Like cases, it's like, oh, this is instantly just got terrible because the person that I've been rooting for the whole time just died.
Yeah, exactly. It's a difficult sort of tightrope to balance, but it's very much, you need to do it right, and there is ways to do it right and ways to not do it.
I do think in the alternate ending they do it right. Like they do give that. But like I do recommend, like, if you ever go watch the movie again, to like look up that alternate ending. To the first movie.
Yeah. I'll definitely have to next time I watch this. I'll have to try and find the alternate ending to sort of watch instead. And so I've sort of got a hopeful ending with hoping for good things in the future.
Because it's like it brings like a whole different tone to the movie.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So then there's like the second movie.
Then there's
which
28 weeks later, which I didn't like as much. I thought was a
same
comparatively weaker film. Not necessarily a bad film, but I don't think there's not as much to go into because there's a lot of stuff that sort of is kind of covered on already, and it's sort of more there's sort of some stuff that's a bit similar, but also there's some new stuff. It was made a few years later in about 2007 or so, I think. So it was about
I personally find that the characters are a lot more weaker.
Yeah, I definitely cared for the characters a lot less.
Yeah.
I sort of think that, in a sort of comparative sense, I was less invested in what happened to the characters and sort of where the story ended up.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I felt sort of in a technical sense, this film, like sort of in 28 Days Later, it's not like the most outstanding sort of filmmaking ever, but it's very much, but like it all works. It's not being like mental. It's not like shaky cam for every scene, really. It's sort of more just like gives you good shots to sort of establish things and to sort of see things as they're happening.
And like there's techniques like, you know, when they don't play any music or anything like that,
it's a lot more muted,
complete silence.
Yeah,
but there is like musical scores in there that really help with atmosphere building and all that.
Yeah, and 28 Weeks Later sort of goes in sort of a more opposite direction. I'm trying to just think. I think pretty much there was no scenes of just like where there was just like sort of people just sort of by themselves just trying. I mean, it's a bit of a different kind of film because the characters think that the virus has been sort of eradicated and that there aren't any more infected, but
they're repopulating and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Like the opening scene, I'm pretty sure it's sort of implied that it takes place around the same time as 28 Days Later. So because we meet these characters and they get attacked in a house by infected, and they all pretty much die except for Robert Carlyle, who's
who's the husband. Which I gotta say, that scene when he like abandons his wife, like don't get me wrong, it's a bastard of a move.
Yeah.
But like I don't blame him because
it's one like, of those scenes where it's like it's one of those things like, you're sort of stuck between like a kind of a rock and a hard place. Like, do you go in to save, your wife and, risk, dying, or do you abandon her and pretty much guarantee that she will die, and sort of feel kind of responsible for causing her to die? It's sort of like, which do you choose, do you value her life over your life, you
gotta think of this way. It's like, was he like thinking about, is it better to have one of us escaping and caring for the kids, or both of us dying and the kids having no parents?
Yeah.
But you gotta think, was he thinking about that, or was he like, nah, I'm just gonna leave you because I want to live?
Yeah, it's sort of not, this film doesn't really do the emotional beats quite as well as the first one did. It kind of felt a bit more weaker and a bit more muted in the moments where I was meant to sort of care for what was happening to these characters. I was more just like, I was less bothered by it. I was just like, okay, stuff's happened, but I'm not as invested in this.
And like the characters itself, again, weren't really that interesting. Weren't really like, I wasn't really invested as much into those characters.
Yeah, like
as the original.
Yeah, I felt the characters were a lot more like idiotic and made more sort of stupid decisions that, like, I sort of, because in 28 Days, I didn't really feel like they did anything like they didn't do anything that like they could have avoided. They sort of, everything they did, it made sense, and you probably would do the same thing too. Even Frank, when he kicks the thing and gets the blood in his eye, it sort of fits within his character. But that's the only bit which is a bit like, okay, it's a bit stupid, but even then it sort of works. Whereas in this, it's kind of like, why are you doing this,
Yeah, and like, like letting in the scene when, they let the kid in, and like they know there's infected around, and it's like, if you make noise or let the kid in, and like they have the lights up, even though they said, look, we need to turn the lights off and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they know what not to do, but they do it anyway, and it's like, and like I get it, like the dilemma of would you let the kid in or would you leave him out to die?
Yeah.
But like, still, like I wouldn't leave him out to die probably, but still, you've got to think like,
you know, yeah.
Are you trying to survive or are you trying to be friendly? And,
and there's sort of other bits throughout the film, like the two kids, the kids of Robert Carlyle and the woman Alice, I think it is.
Isn't it like Andy and isn't it Andy and Tammy or is it Scarlett? I can't remember.
I'm not actually. I didn't make a note. I feel like I should have made a note of that. I'll just quickly check. But the two kids of the dad are essentially
Don.
So it's Don and Alice. Oh, Don. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and like
their kids sneak off across town like you do, you know. It's just like I know they're stupid kids, but it's like one of them is like old enough to probably understand and know better, like, you know, probably shouldn't, you know,
sneak off, not tell anyone where I'm going, and like leave the area where you might get killed and bitten or something like that.
Recent, you know, at time recently ended zombie apocalypse, you know, like.
Yeah, or like in the state of like ending, like the apocalypse end.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like why would you?
The final moments.
Yeah, it's just sort of like why would you do that, you know? And it's just like it's just tried to create tension and sort of stakes, but doing it in a stupid way. You know, this way of trying to get you to be like, oh, you know, what's going to happen? But in reality, it's just like, you just kind of think like, man, they're just being stupid, you know, and they're making stupid decisions.
Like, that's like the zombie apocalypse, that's like the zombie movie trope or zombie, like, franchise trope is that, like, people do really dumb stuff that you as the viewer go like, why did you do that? You could have done that, or like, why didn't you do that? It's like the same. It's like it's virtually like not only zombie apocalypse, but horror in general.
Yeah, it's
you like go like, why did you do that?
Why do you go to the strange noise outside? You know, why do you go into the dark basement? You know.
Yeah, or like, why didn't you lock the door? Like, come on.
It's just a bit.
And then like the whole thing when they bring in carriers, like. They got immunity to the virus, but they can still carry it. And I'm like,
that seems like a
really dumb. Like
that's weird, especially getting that, you know, with a very big population of people, you know.
Yeah, and like I wouldn't, because that kind of like gets rid of a bit of the first movie, because you would think like, well, wouldn't there be a lot more people that are just carriers and not infected? Than carriers.
Yeah.
And then like, I know some diseases in real life, you know, people can't get sick with it, but they can still carry it and infect others with it.
Yeah, like they could be asymptomatic. And, you know.
Yeah.
You know, someone could have, you know, the flu or, you know, sort of that kind of disease, but you don't know it, and then you spread it to people, and you're like, oh, yeah, what? Oh, you know. I guess it's like COVID, I guess, is sort of the best way,
exactly.
Know? You could have it, and you could spread it, but you wouldn't necessarily have symptoms to spread it. It's just like, it seems like a bad idea to sort of be like, let's bring, you know, these people that could have this disease to, you know, with other people, you know, and it's just like...
And, like, the whole thing, like, oh, we can use Alice's blood to help find a cure, and it's like, well, no...
Yeah, I mean, isn't that kind of what they...
it works. It's a genetic thing.
Yeah.
It's like, not a thing that can actually, like, happen. It's just, like, oh, it's the luck of the draw. And I find it a bit annoying because it brings like, it's just, like, having people that are just immune and that they can get infected.
It takes away from the virus, doesn't it? And sort of the threat of it, that like, oh, they're just people who just, you know, can't get it, you know. right? Is that sort of what you?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the weirdest scenes in the film, because
the infected like vomit blood on people.
Yeah,
and like
it's really weird because you don't. I don't. There wasn't anything like that in the first film, was there? There was more just them dripping blood, but that was just sort of, from that. It wasn't like, oh, they just, vomiting over everyone. It's just, there's,
This one, in the first movie, there's like 2 or 3 scenes when infected start puking, like they start puking blood, or like when they're going through the transformation.
Oh yeah, but it's not like they're doing it, all the
time. They like start puking blood. No.
Yeah,
it's like a every now and thing. Like you see one person, like in the whole ending scene, one person does get infected by one of the infected puking on them. It's not like a thing that happens all the time. It's mostly like bites and all that,
or or something like that. It's usually
and like
that's
a real problem in the second movie. Sorry, continue.
One scene that I found really weird is when Don and Alice. So the kids have. With this one, I'm not as concerned about sort of going through like scene by scene because I'm less interested in talking about like individual scenes because it's because I just didn't care as much about this one. Basically, Alice. They find Alice. And she's brought back because she doesn't have any. If I remember correctly, she's found in like a house by the 2 kids. Yeah, and at first I was like, why are these kids just? Why is this kid just standing there, just staring at this woman? I was like, but I was also thinking like, is this? But I couldn't really tell. It's like, are they infected? And if so, why are they not like trying to kill this kid? And then we sort of find out, that's why. And then she meets with Don, who's her husband, and the first thing he does when he sees her, I guess it kind of makes sense, but it's a bit like weird, I guess.
In like the scene that happens is that doesn't she get like quarantined by the military and they like tie her up to a bed or something?
They quarantine her because they want to use her to see if they can cure it, I think it is. Or they want to try and do that with it. And so Don, her husband, gets in and he kisses her.
Even though it's obvious that she's like that.
And then he becomes
infected or something.
Yeah, and then he becomes infected. And he's just sort of vomiting up blood, and then he kills her.
Yeah.
And then goes on a massive murder spree and just infects a lot of people inside the whole in the building
facility.
Facility, because they're all all the people are together in this one place.
And like I really find it dumb how the area that they like all evacuate to is like a underground car.
Yeah.
And it's like you're trapping a bunch of people where like people are like the infected are drawn to people, and you're trapping all of them in one small area to keep them safe. But it's like, well, if one person, and as you see in the movie, if one infected gets in, then it's just like a domino effect that one person gets bitten, and then the next person, then the next person, next.
So and so there's this big thing of everyone's getting infected and they start escaping, and then these soldiers around, one of which is played by Jeremy Renner, who I was unaware was in this film.
Exactly, I know.
And we also had Idris Elba as one of like the sort of head guys earlier as well, which is a bit interesting. I was not expecting him to be in this. So it was. I was
gonna say though, Jeremy Renner, I still actually liked his character. Like
I thought he was one of the better characters. Probably the best character. I didn't really care for any of the others though, so I guess that sort of explains why they so they're all running out and they're having this
Jeremy Renner,
they're having these
shoot them down and
shooting them down, and then eventually they just tell them to just shoot anyone. So they just start shooting, the innocent civilians, except Jeremy Renner's character, who is against that and sort of stops and sort of
yeah.
And so there's just tons of dead people just everywhere, because
yeah.
So we don't.
How it is.
Yeah, Tammy and Andy are they're the two kids. I think that's. Yeah, and Scarlett was one of like the doctors or something. I think maybe so.
Probably.
So we get so I'm just looking at so Doyle, who is Jeremy Renner's character, Tammy and Andy, who are the two kids, and Scarlett, who's the sort of doctor. Sort of, it's just them together. They're the four characters we follow throughout most of the rest of the film. And
yeah, it was just not a good sequel.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
the same.
There's a really, I don't really want to talk about this one as much because I was actually rather disappointed with it. Honestly, I was hoping like it would be at least semi-decent, but it's been. It was really actually disappointing after how much I liked the first one. There's this scene where they sort of light these the zombies on fire, and I was like, oh, that's gonna kill a ton of them, right? And then they just like run through it. I'm like, so fire doesn't work on the infected? Is that like
in the first movie it works, like they still ran through it, but then they died like shortly after.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just thinking, like, is that like a thing? Because I'm trying to think of like stuff like Resident Evil or like Last of Us, and I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure fire still kills like zombies in those games, and I'm pretty sure
and like in a lot of forms of media, like Shaun of the Dead, World War Z, Walking Dead, fire is the thing that like just obliterates zombies.
Yeah, exactly. And even if it's especially if it's something that was sort of established in like the first film, and it's just weird because it's like, okay, so that should have killed at least some of them, if not a fair amount.
A lot of them.
Yeah, but it was just weird. And then there's the
napalm.
The kids.
Didn't they do like a napalm strike or something at the end of the movie or something like that?
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember exactly what. Yeah, it was something like
that.
The sort of
the movie is that you don't remember anything of it because
exactly.
It's not like memorable.
I sort of for the listeners, I did watch these films like a couple weeks ago, but I do remember quite a bit more about 28 Days Later because it's a far better film. I do remember though the kid's dad. He's infected, but he's much more like sort of smarter than the other infected. Yeah. Like he's like there's a scene where he's like we see him like we see him like standing in like sort of an open area, and the camera pans away, and when it pans back he's gone, like he's fucking Batman or something, and it's like that's not what I sort of expect infected to do. I kind of expect him to like run at them as soon as he sees people, not just
Yeah, and then like in the first movie, that's not a place that they are intelligent enough to like be stealthy. Like they lie down in like corpse piles and all that. Don't get me wrong, and that's like somewhat stealthy, but like hide in the shadows and then just wait to jump out. And like, there's like scene when he's actively only going for his kids.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that's not pre-established in the first film. Like, if that was something they had established, I could go with that, but it wasn't, so I can't. Like, it's just like they're mindless, killing machines that just they'll just, kill anything. They don't care. So I don't know how I'm sort of expected to believe that, like, oh, he's only going for his kids when that's not a established part of the, film canon, I guess. These two kids are seen as, these kids are seen as sort of a bit of a problem, there's this, because they kind of want them all to be killed, and they want the infected to all be killed. The military, that is, and there's a scene with a helicopter, but he won't let them on because they've got 2 civilians with them, and so he just sort of leaves, which is just like, really, like, it's a bit of a lame way to sort of introduce tension to this, I guess.
Yeah, and then like you find out that that the son, the what's his name, Andy, is a carrier, not like he can carry stuff, but he's not He's infected, but he's not infected. He's one of the carrier people.
Because he gets at the sort of the ending sort of confrontation between.
He gets bitten by his dad.
Don, his dad, bites him, but he is then killed. Yeah, and then we find out Andy is sort of symptom free, and his sister is not been bitten, and it's just sort of like, okay, let's see. It felt like a bit unnecessary, and it was very much just like kind of.
It brings down the infection, honestly. Like like the whole thing, like they turn in like 10 to 20 seconds. It's like but then like you get like people that are asymptom carriers. People that don't actually turn into mindless zombies. They just are carriers of the disease. And it's like,
it's just like sucks. It's like, also I feel like if that was a thing, then like, how would there be like as many? I feel like there wouldn't be as many if we don't meet a massive amount of asymptomatic people, but like there's like we still know of at least 2. So I feel like there isn't like the entire country hasn't sort of like
there's gonna be more asymptomatic
than just 2 people. It's just like it's and then the ending sort of implies that the virus has sort of spread beyond England. It is now
because like in the first movie we found like everyone thought it spread in New York and France, and then they find out in the first movie, like eventually find out that no, England's just quarantined, like it's been walled off.
Yeah, nobody's been able to leave.
That's one good thing about the second movie, is that you get to see that in that quarantine, they quarantine another section where the living can start living.
Yeah.
Like the non-infected can start living in that area, and then which like I find that really annoying too, is why didn't they eradicate every infected first before bringing in the non-infected civilians?
Yeah, that seems like a bad idea to try and have sort of 2, people trying to live to, trying to create to deal with one thing and deal with another thing, introducing the non-infected and while trying to deal with the infected, it's like you need to...
And that's what I find really, wait until all the infected are dead, or like napalm everything beforehand, before rebuilding civilization.
Exactly.
In that area.
Exactly. It just, the sequel just felt like lazy writing. It just felt like at times contrivances to sort of create a plot and to sort of have a story sort of made out of it, and it was just like it didn't work as well. So I definitely was left disappointed by 28 weeks later. And also at one point Jeremy Renner's character dies, and I didn't even really care for that, even though I thought he was probably the best character of the film. I was like, yeah, alright, he's sacrificing himself to save the characters, but
and you can kind of tell, like, that's what his character was going to do from like the very beginning.
Yeah. So
as soon as he stops firing on the civilians, it's like...
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I was like, he's probably going to...
He's going to be that character that's going to...
He's the military
sacrifice
guy. Yeah, exactly. I'm a lot more down on it. So, is there anything you want to touch on, like any sort of final things you want to touch on with either film, actually, before we sort of wrap this up?
Other than, like, I think the first film is a pretty good take on the whole zombie apocalypse genre, and I still think it's one of the things that influenced the like, and still influences it like today.
Yeah, the more modern zombie film.
It's like the thing that, like, without, I think it's a movie that if we didn't have zombie movies wouldn't be as popular as they are now.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, yeah, as we mentioned sort of at the beginning, you know, they sort of hit a sort of decline of, like, sort of you weren't really seeing them much after, like, the 80s, and then, yeah, early 2000s, you know.
Late 90s.
Yeah.
It changed. It changed everything.
Yeah. So usually at the end of this, we put a rating on the film or films if we're covering multiple films out of 10. So would you like to rate 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later as well if you wish
All right. So 28 Days Later, I would probably give it like maybe at 8.5.
Yep. Right.
And then like 28 Weeks Later, I'll probably give it like a 4.
Yeah. So I'll echo those statements with 28 Days Later. I give it an 8 out of 10. I was surprised at how much I liked it. I'm not like the biggest zombie fan. I do like zombie stuff, you know. I like The Last of Us. I think is a great game and a very good piece of zombie media. The Evil Dead films are really good. Shaun of the Dead is great.
Yeah.
Metroid Fusion is a really great game. You know, and those sorts of things. But zombies and Train to Busan also is another zombie film that I like. But I'm not like the biggest zombie person. But I do. I can enjoy zombie stuff. It just sort of depends if it sort of has the sort of sensibilities that I have for it. And 28 Weeks Later, I feel like this is a bit generous. I'm probably gonna. I've got it as a 6, but sort of the more I think about it, I'm actually gonna bump it down to a 5. So 28 Days Later is an 8 out of 10, and 28 Weeks Later is a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So there is a supposed third film coming.
Really?
28 months later is the supposedly they will be making. I'm not sure how. I mean, it has been a long time since they did 28 Weeks Later, so I'm not entirely sure if they will make it. I would definitely be interested to see what they do with it, and I'd definitely be willing to, you know, go see it, considering I do think it would be interesting to sort of see talking about it. So I just sort of talked about the Danny Boyle, the director of the first one, did an interview, and he talked with the screenwriter of 28 Days about how they had an idea for a third part, and how it's not really anything like the first one, and now like they both Danny Boyle and the screenwriter Alex Garland are sort of working on their own projects at the moment, but they do sort of have ideas and sort of have an idea on what to do for a third one if they eventually make that. And I feel like they will make it at some point. I would definitely like them to make a third one, because I would like to sort of see them sort of wrap up the trilogy and see how the whole thing concludes.
And like, I think being the, you know, director he is, I think he probably would have learnt from the mistakes of 28 Weeks Later.
Yeah, definitely, because he didn't direct it, but he would know, like, okay, so this is what, you know, doesn't work in that film, and keep the stuff that worked in in the first one. So
yeah, exactly. From the looks of it, it looks like it's set in Paris, in France.
Yeah,
it's the thing that was left. Like, they were going to France.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how 28 Weeks Later, and, you know, the virus sort of gets over to France, and to Europe. But I think it is to France specifically.
Yeah, because you, like, at the end credits, like, at the end scene, you see, like, infected running around around the, like, with the Eiffel Tower in the background. So
exactly. Yeah, and I think to fair, if you were to do a third one, you could explore even more countries. You know, you could have if you wanted to sort of go like that. But I think you could sort of show more countries and how it sort of has affected, like, the entire world, maybe, or sort of imply that it's gotten pretty much to every sort of major civilization, but sort of have it start in Paris and then sort of have reference to like, oh, it's gotten to to Russia and to the US and to Canada and all these other countries.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I like about this movie so much is that, again, it's not set in America.
Yeah, exactly. And if you were to,
and I think that gives it a charm.
Yeah, exactly. And if you were to do, 28, months later, you could do that, in a, in Paris, and it would work just as well, because it's...
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's... And I feel like just whenever they do it, I'll be happy to go see it, because it's something I'm very interested to see them do and to see how they would wrap up the story in a hopefully satisfying way, but it is kind of hard to sort of wrap up zombie apocalypses satisfyingly. I found it
exactly
hard to try, because either it ends off like it's still happening, or it just sort of is like a bit like anticlimactic, like, oh, and then the whole country was bombed or something like that. Like it's sort of like, nah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it, unless there's any sort of final things you want to talk about.
No,
okay.
So yeah, I said everything I wanted.
Yeah. So thank you for joining me on this one. This was a really fun discussion to have, talking about these two films. Helped, and you helped sort of give me some new appreciation for them as well, or depreciation in 28 Weeks Later's case. And I'd love to have you back on again for another episode. This is a really good...
I would definitely
love to come
whenever you want me,
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, thank you all for listening to this week's episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. Another long one, but, that's how it goes. We just start talking and just see how long it goes, So, yeah, check out all the social media, check out, all the various pieces of things that I continuously plug, check out all the previous episodes of this podcast, and, is there anything, Aaron, that you would like to plug? I don't think so, but I just asked just to be nice.
Not really.
Not really, yeah. People usually don't when I ask them, but I just ask just in case. So, yeah, and thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.